Good. This is our Vision Committee meeting for City Council. We'll go ahead and get started with a roll call if we can.
Councilmember Dennehy, absent. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Here.
Councilmember Jaquez, absent. Councilmember Meisner.
Here.
Councilmember Reed, absent. Councilmember B. Smith, absent. Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick, absent. Mayor Smith.
Here. So we don't have a full quorum today, and that's okay. We can still proceed. This is an informational meeting, and no action will be taken. And this will be recorded, so hopefully our other council members can take some time and watch it later on in their own time. Ryan, do you want me to turn the time over to you first?
Yeah, absolutely. So tonight we're going to be discussing use tax and sales tax self-collection. These are discussions that we have been having for quite some time here at City Hall and revamping some of these processes. You know, it was before COVID, but we do think that they will have some positive impacts for us and help with some of the business-friendly aspects that we're trying to improve upon here at City Hall. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy Nordyke, our Finance Director, for the presentation. Tammy, are you there?
I'm having issues with audio.
Oh, that's a lot better.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yep.
Never mind then. I think we're good. Other than you are going to hear my bird. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, I think, if I can. Elijah, can you help me with that?
Yes, so if you move your mouse over the Zoom window, there should be a share screen on the bottom. And when you click on that, it will ask you which monitor you'd like to share. You just have to click that screen and share.
All right, got it. All right, so tonight we are going to discuss some changes that we would like to see happen in our use tax collection, and then also our sales tax collection. We do have Tarla available, and I'm not sure if Kathy Ulsh is on this evening or not, and then Catherine is available too for additional questions. Okay, if I can get the screen to move forward. There we go. All right, currently we collect our use tax when the building permit is issued. And if contractors feel that they have overpaid their use tax, they can file for a refund by doing a self-audit. We also have use tax collected on stock or inventory, and that was the originally purchased at wholesale by a person who's going to, who if you remove it from inventory and you use it for personal use, you do have to pay use tax on that, and you have to report it on your sales and use tax return. And then on automobile, it's paid directly to Fremont County for the city. Currently, how we calculate what is owed on the construction materials, when the building permit is issued, a valuation is determined. And then we take 50% of that valuation, times it by the 3% tax that the city charges, plus 2.5% tax that we collect on behalf of the county. And that equals the total estimated tax collected. And for that, then the contractor receives a use tax deposit receipt, and they're able to purchase their materials without having to pay the tax at that time, because essentially it's been prepaid. What we would like to do is we would like to to make it that we do not collect it at the time of the building permit issuance. And we would create an affidavit that essentially would say that they will collect, they will pay sales tax at basically the point of sale, and that all of the receipts will be subject to an audit from the city staff. With that, we would also have to stop, we would also recommend stopping collecting the county use tax. We're not proposing changes in either the stock or inventory. There's still no change on that, or with the automobiles, just the way it relates to the construction materials. And as I mentioned, it will be this construction materials, they'll pay the tax at the point of sale. And since we do have destination taxing, our sales tax should still be the same or greater than what we're charging for use tax. What we have noticed is when we first went to this, we had some contractors that were not necessarily happy with the way things were going, so they submitted some self-audits. Well, they realized that when they initially were charged the use tax, they paid less than they actually should have. So with the self-audit, they ended up owing us additional tax. So we don't get very many self-audits right now. So what that's basically showing us is that our valuation that the use tax is based on is probably lower than it should be. The other thing that it does not capture is when a contractor does upgrades. So let's say they change from a entry level or let's say a base cabinet, and they upgrade the cabinets. So the materials are upgraded. And on that, then their cost of the project is higher, but they have not paid the tax on that. So with this, it should allow us to collect more of the tax that is due to the city. We would also have them sign the affidavit that basically says that they will ensure that all of the sales tax that is due to the city will be paid to the city essentially when they purchase it. So if they go to Home Depot or have it delivered, they will pay the proper taxes. If they purchase something at Lowe's and have it delivered, they'll make sure to pay the city sales tax.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Sure. Yes.
Is that legal? That if they buy something in Colorado Springs or Pueblo, that we can charge them sales tax?
It's based on destination. So if they buy it in Colorado Springs and have it delivered within the city limits.
Yes.
Yes.
But not if they buy it and pick it up, right?
Correct. How we would capture that is when they have been issued, after they've been issued their CO, finance can do an audit on the materials, and we can determine at that time if they have paid the proper tax to the city. And so if they did a lot of purchases, let's say in El Paso County or Pueblo County, and picked them up and did not pay the city tax, we then would be able to assess it to the contractor at that time.
Catherine, can they do that?
Yeah, can the city do that? Yes.
So you're double taxing.
Oh. Well, so the way that the code reads is that the only exemption from use tax that relates to sales tax is a sales tax imposed by the city, meaning the city of Canyon City. So if they pay a sales tax anywhere else, they're not exempt from the city's use tax.
Does
Does that make sense?
I don't like that.
Well, that, I mean, we can change that in the code if you want. That's a kind of slightly separate issue, although it's related to what Tammy's talking about. But that's the way it
Okay.
reads right now.
We can talk later.
Okay.
Thanks, Tammy.
Yes, so if we, if we were to move forward with that, we would need to change part of the code. Part of it would relate to the certificate of occupancy. It would actually need to be issued upon final inspection from the building department and not after an audit was completed. We'd want to have that issued before, and then we would go ahead and issue, then we would do the audit from the city. We would also have to modify any of the other areas of the code that may apply to the construction sales and use tax. We would need to notify Fremont County that we would not be collecting their use tax at the time of permit issuance. And then we would need to notify contractors of the change in the process and the requirements for the audit and how they would be subject to that. Do you have any other questions as it relates to the change that we would like to implement?
I have a question. Have any contractors been taught, have you reached out to them to get their feelings on this or their opinions and how this could affect their business?
Is Kathy Ulsh on or no?
I don't see her on.
Okay. Basically, what this would also do is it would get us in line with most of the Southwest region, because it is a common practice that the use tax is not collected at the time of the building permit issuance. For instance, when I purchased my building permit in El Paso County, I did not pay any use tax at that time. I just paid my building permit fees and any other fees that I had. And I did sign saying that I could be subject to an audit to ensure that I have paid the proper taxes for El Paso County.
I think, one of the most common complaints that we get from the building department has to do with use tax and collection of the use tax. And, especially those upfront fees. And I think that, by changing that process, not having those upfront fees, and streamlining the process in some ways, that's going to be something that's going to be, should be a benefit for local businesses and being more business friendly.
So we have a comment from the Facebook comment feed that I think we should address. It says, this is from Autumn Deaver. She says, I administer the self-help housing program for UCOG. We self-audited the city sales tax during 2 of our builds, and we overpaid sales tax by paying use tax. The tracking of this during a build is daunting, but I would do it again if we needed. So I'm not sure if Autumn, if you can, I'm assuming you're listening. When you say do it again, do you mean, would you prefer to self-audit with the use tax, or would you prefer to go towards this new proposal to go to a sales tax and pay at the time of purchase of materials?
And while we wait for a response there, and I see Dolly also has a question, but I'm going to make one comment real quick. We use a formula to determine what the use tax is going to be. This would be, they would be paying tax on the actual materials that they're using. So it is, it does seem to be a little bit more even or fair based off of, they're being taxed on what they're using versus using that formula.
But to clarify, at the end, it's supposed to be all sorted out by their actual receipts and everything like that, so they're not paying more than they should. I mean, that's just the estimate on the front end, but on the back end, it should be, sorted out and accounted for, right?
So Autumn said she'd prefer to self-audit so that she could keep track of those receipts. So you're saying that they would keep track of the receipts and just pay what they actually purchased.
Yeah, I think both now and Tammy, please correct me if I'm wrong, in the system that Tammy's suggesting, there would need to be documentation of all the purchases and everything like that to support that audit down on the backside. So
Yes, that is correct. And just for council's information, in the last year, I think we have had one, maybe two people submit a self-audit requesting excess use tax be refunded to them. Because they can right now, if they've overpaid the tax, they can do that self-audit. With the collection of the tax at the time of purchase now, that should eliminate, they will still be subject to an audit. It would not be a self-audit, it would be the city performing the audit, and just to ensure that they paid the proper amount of tax.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dolly had a question, and then I see Jim's raising his hand, Madam Mayor.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
going to let Jim go ahead because I need to process through my questions.
And you're saying that this is common practice in the southern portion of the state in terms of how people are handling that, cities are handling that?
Yes, I had spoke with Kathy Ulsh about that, and she said that it is a common practice in the Southwest region.
And how does she know?
She's reached out to other building departments and has asked what their practices are.
Okay. So I guess I need a clarification or a better understanding. The use tax essentially is a tax that the city is saying, you're going to pay a sales tax, even though we're not going to call it sales tax, on purchases that you made outside of the city. Is that correct? That's what the use tax is?
no, so the use tax and sales tax system work in tandem. Okay, so solely, let's just talk about within the city first. So that's why they're the same amount. They're meant to make sure that the sale or consumption of tangible personal property is subject to the same sales tax, or the same tax, sorry, the 3%, I think, in Canyon. And so they're supposed to work in tandem. Now, in your code right now, there is an exemption from sales tax for use tax imposed by another municipality. So I live in Florence, and I paid my use tax to Florence to get my building permit, and I come to Canyon to the Home Depot and I buy materials, and I'm exempt from Canyon sales tax because I've shown that I paid Florence's use tax. Okay, so that's how it's supposed to work. So, but in your use tax section of your code, it doesn't have the same exemption. It doesn't mirror exactly that language. So what happens is if I buy stuff in Colorado Springs at the Home Depot, and I pick it up there and I bring it into Canyon to build something, I'm still subject to the city's use tax. And I've paid sales tax potentially in Colorado Springs because I didn't pay use tax up front with my building permit in Canyon under what Tammy's proposing. So I can't use that in Colorado Springs when I go make that purchase. that's unusual not to have those provisions mirror each other to I think accomplish what your concern is, that they wouldn't have to pay the city's use tax if they paid sales tax somewhere else. Now, whether that could result in a decrease in revenue to the city, I don't know. I don't know how often people do that. So I don't know if Tammy would even be able to assess that. It's a really specific issue. So, but that's the way your code is worded now. So, but most communities have mirroring provisions. So if you pay use tax somewhere, you're exempt from sales tax. If you pay sales tax somewhere, you're exempt from use tax. Does that help answer your question? It's a little confusing the way that it's worded in your code.
Well, it may be confusing in code, but you've stated my exact concern is that I think we're fringing upon free marketing and free enterprise when we start. If I recall properly or correctly, I think the use tax was implemented to address that specific issue. Is that way back when council was concerned about the amount of goods that were being purchased outside the county to be brought in the county or in the city and utilized for construction. And to counter that, they came up with this use tax concept, or implement the use tax concept.
Yeah, they probably adopted one. I mean, it's not a novel concept,
right,
but that's exactly what it's meant to do. It's meant to level the playing field. So you got a local contractor who's buying from the Home Depot and Canyon, and then you have maybe a larger contractor who's buying or bringing in product from somewhere else where the tax has been paid, and then is paying either a lower rate or no tax in another community, and is obviously maybe walking away with more profit on that job because they're paying less taxes. So, because the taxes ultimately cut into the profit.
How would a contractor not be paying any tax?
Depends on where the product's coming from. Could be coming from well, maybe not no tax, but maybe like a lower tax. So
I'll buy lower tax,
okay.
but
How about lower tax?
There you go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dolly.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, what this does is it takes the liability off of us as a city and puts it onto the contractor to pay the correct amount of use tax. We're not doing all the calculations. We're not collecting the money. It's pretty much up to the contractor or builder to decide or to figure out what use tax they're paying. Is that correct?
So what it does is it eliminates the essential prepayment of the sales or use tax when the permit is issued. And then when they go to Home Depot to purchase, they're paying sales tax directly to Home Depot. Home Depot remits it to us. What would happen after the project is complete, we would then say, okay, contractor, show us what your project cost and what taxes were paid. And we would verify that the correct amount of taxes were paid.
And that would be determined before they were given their CO?
No, we would have to issue the CO first and then do the audit after, because otherwise their CO could be delayed for it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could, depending on how many are completed at that time, it could be further delayed. And we do not want to delay the issuance of COs.
Okay. And then my next question is, this is a pretty big transition and there are several projects that are happening right now. How would it impact the people, the contractors and builders who are currently in the building process and have paid their use tax up front?
Their use tax deposit receipt is still valid. And so they would still be able to take that receipt, that use tax receipt, to Home Depot and show them that they have already paid the tax. So
Right.
at the point of sale, they would not be charged the tax again.
Okay. So their rules and standards would apply until the end of that project, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim?
So, Mayor Smith had asked you a question, and I didn't catch that you answered it. I had the same question, and that is, you maybe deferred it to Kathy, but what kind of outreach did we do with the contractors in terms of what kind of impact this is going to have on the contractor?
As of right now, we have not reached out to the contractors to see what their thoughts are. We do have a lot of complaints when they come in and pay their building permit, how much it costs up front, because we are collecting, you know, let's say a couple $1,000s or more, let's say, you know, $3,000-4,000 in taxes up front on top of the building permit fee plus any other permit fees or the fees that they have that they need to pay. And so what it does with the builders is it allows them to not have as big of initial outflow of their cash to start the project. So when they're purchasing the materials is when it's paid versus lump sum at the beginning. And we wanted to make sure to speak to council about what we are considering or what we'd like to have happen before we went out to the contractors to say, hey, this is what we're going, you know, we're going to change this on you.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, okay. I don't necessarily agree with that process, but the new process would require a contractor to do a audit at the end of his project.
They would be subject to an audit from the city.
How are you going to determine who to audit?
What we would end up doing is, while the when this is still new, we would, depending on how many COs are issued, we would try to do at least 75% of them, and it would just be a random. And then we would determine at that point to see how many, you know, if it looks like it's coming in where it needs to be, we'll reduce that percentage, and then we can just do it random.
I have a concern about and don't take this wrong, the history, the city doesn't have a really good history of the random process. And I can tell you that that just winds up being an area where we wind up questioning that, you know, the random process can have one contractor getting audited much more than another contractor. Because random isn't truly random. But and then we have to deal with the accusations of targeting, like some of the issues that we have to deal with all due respect of our building department, where you know, contractor A came up short on his taxes, and then coincidentally he gets another audit next month. And it's not coincidental, it's random, but we all know how that looks.
Right. And if a contractor is a bigger contractor, so let's say they are one of the main home builders within the city, chances are they're going to be audited more just because they've pulled more permits. We can come up, right, we can come up with a process that, let's say that we have the COs that were issued for the prior month, and we have what their permit numbers were, and we can have, you know, for lack of better words, essentially have those numbers in a hat and pick out 2 or 3 of them. So it is completely random, and we can have somebody else pull those to see who's audited, and we can come up with that process. You know, I'm not sure how many COs are issued a month, but if we needed to, we could start with auditing every single CO or every single building permit after the CO is issued. And we can do that for a while. And then there would not be any randomness to it, and we would not be, you know, picking on one contractor.
I guess what I would like some feedback on before I moved forward is I would like to see what the contractors feel about that audit. I see
Well-
that as really being a contentious thing.
Not just the audit, but feel about changing the whole process. I'd like to have a group meeting with the contractors before we take this to council.
Absolutely, and we can do that. I think, you know, anecdotally from what we've heard is that this would be a positive change, but we could put some more legwork behind that and have some actual you know, more concrete conversations with the contractors about that.
I think one of the huge positives is getting rid of that use tax and all the controversy that comes with it, particularly that we've dealt with over the last year and a half or something with different types of buildings, and that not necessarily being appropriate. But I would want to know if the contractors understood that at the end of the process, they are subject to and more than likely will have an audit. And I don't know that that would change their thinking.
Dolly, you had raised a little bit earlier. Did you have some more to say?
Yeah, I guess I do. You know, this issue's come up the whole time I've been on council. It comes up every couple of months. Somebody calls about use tax. And I have learned, well, my husband used to be a building or a plans examiner for a building department. And he used to work for the town of Castle Rock, Woodland Park. And neither one of them used use tax. He said it just took one step out of the process for them, made it a little easier on them. And then there was less money for contractors to put up at the front. So, you know, I think it's hard when you go in and you pay for a permit, and then you're having to pay use tax on top of that. So I'm for this change. I'm just concerned how it's gonna roll out and how messy it might be, trying to close up some projects that have already started. That's my only concern.
Well, yeah, and we would have a clear line and delineation. So, you know, any permits that were pulled after a specific date, those would be under the new process. Anything that is already out there, they would continue under the old process because they've already made those prepayments.
Okay. I would like to see this move forward. I think it'd be a good move for the city and for our contractors as well. So,
Jim?
Well, just in closing, I think it's a good move forward to get rid of the use tax, but I don't like the double tax thing. I mean, we need to let the market help control things, and if somebody goes to Pueblo because the product is cheaper, I think that's more of an issue with our local suppliers, that government shouldn't necessarily be involved in that whole process and trying to dictate where people should be buying their product.
I think we need to vet through some of this, do a little bit more research on it, and I would like to reach out to some contractors and kind of go through it with them as well. It sounds like We have a lot of contractors that do build in several other communities that probably already do this and are accustomed to it. And it'd be good to hear from them before we take it to council.
I
Make sure we
agree.
like the right product and have them behind us.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do some more legwork around that. We just wanted to introduce it to council. And, you know, I think to address Jim's or Councilman Meisner's point is that, you know, we're doing this to try and streamline processes, not create new, more arduous processes. So, you know, when we bring a final product to council, we'll have that vetted out, but we want to make sure that we're heading down the right path before we put too much time and effort into this.
Well, the three of us say, let's do some more research and move forward. So,
Right, and I understand what Ryan is saying, but there's this underlying factor here that those audits is going to be much more frequent, and that is going to be much more of a burden on the city because we're not doing audits right now. And we're not doing audits right now because the contractor is getting the advantage of it, but I don't know that the additional revenue that we're going to gather is going to be worth the effort. Thanks.
okay, I think we're good. Are we good on this subject and ready to move on to the next one?
Much as we can be. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you. Oh, you haven't got rid of me yet.
Well, we haven't heard the bird either.
Well, I'm sure she'll be speaking up pretty soon.
The bird is the word.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can she talk?
Oh, when she wants, but not very often.
Is it good or bad language?
Good. Yeah, she's pretty good. She doesn't say anything bad, so that's good. All right, so moving on, the next thing that we would like to discuss with City Council and proposed changes relates to our actual sales tax and the way that it is done. Currently, we are self-collected. The program that we use is not user-friendly, not only for our businesses, but also for city staff. And City Council had approved that we went to monthly filings. I think that was possibly 2 years ago. And so what that does is that requires additional paperwork for businesses and also city staff. You have some businesses that do not have a large sales tax liability every month, but yet they're still required to file that sales tax return. Some of those individuals pay an outside firm to file it, so it also increases the costs to that business. What we would like to do is we would like to move to state collected. What it does is it will we will have to align our filing periods with the state. So if somebody is a quarterly filer with the state, they would become essentially a quarterly filer for the city. If they're monthly, it stays the same. It also eliminates an additional return that the businesses would have to file because they would have one place to file. They would go to the state's website. They currently go there now anyhow to pay state tax and county tax. And so then they would go ahead and pay the city tax there at the same time. It also allows us to continue to collect from the out of area businesses. And then it also reduces costs. At the beginning of the year, the state reached out to us and asked if we wanted to join in with their program that they're doing, that they're collecting for the out of area businesses, essentially the online businesses. And if we opted into that, that would not cost us anything. And what that would do is it would make a simple way for, let's say, Amazon to file their return. They would no longer file a return directly with the city. They would file it with the state, and then the state would pay us. The problem with that is they would only do that for the out-of-town businesses. so the online retailers. So we would have some people that would file with us, some that would file with the state. So we thought, okay, that doesn't sound like too good a plan for us. What else can we do? So we also looked to see what other options we had. One option was going with a program that the state will be using to do their online sales tax collections, and that is MuniRevs. We received a price from them, and it was a few $1,000s a month for the program. So that would have increased our costs greatly. So then we thought, okay, what else can we do? And so we reached out to the state and asked, okay, what's involved if we went state collected? How much does it cost us? And essentially, it does not cost us anything to move to state collected. We do get our funds a little bit later. They do all the enforcement. So if there's any audits that need to be done, we can reach out to them and we can say business XYZ hasn't, we don't think that, they haven't been filing, and we really think that they should be, or whatever, and they can look into it more. So they have more enforcement ability than we do. They can also go and they can attach their property, seize their property, and sell it, where we don't have those rights. By the time we actually have been able to get somebody processed through the courts and all the procedures that we need, some of the businesses that have not paid us, they are already 90 plus days behind. And then you add additional time to get through courts, and some of them have actually ended up closing before we can collect any of the funds that are owed to us. And there's really nothing, there's not a whole lot we can do to get that, since we can't attach their property. There are some pros and some cons with anything. One thing is, it does align us a little more with the Wayfair collection, which says that you need to, in order to collect from online retailers or out of area retailers, it has to be an easy process. Right now, that retailer would have to go in, file a return with us, go in, file a return with the state. So they have two just for one sale in Canyon City. They can say that that's too difficult, and essentially they can eliminate themselves from that having to collect and remit sales tax to us. It would reduce costs for the city. We would not be mailing out our letters that we do for our late notices. We would not be mailing out license renewal letters. So we had estimated over $16,000 in costs that we could save. We would have the increased enforcement, and then we'd potentially have an increase in revenue. I had asked the state for their number of active licenses, and that they had for inside of the city. They showed that inside of city limits, they had actually over 500 licensed facilities that were remitting tax. Our records show we have 300, I want to say like 372. So we have about 200 businesses that we're not collecting tax from right now. The big one is the out of area retailers. We show that we have about 1,100 online retailers or out of area retailers remitting tax to us. The state shows over 8,000 that have done business within the city limits. And so we could see a potential revenue increase with that. I also was able to pull some data from the state's website. And if we looked at taking what the state collected in their sales tax in 2019 and compared it to ours, our actual sales tax and the state sales tax, if we would have had the same exemptions, it would have shown that we had about $1 million, that we collected $1 million more than what the state would have. But that's saying we had the same exemptions that the state, and we don't. We tax food and we tax other items that the state doesn't. So I also ran an analysis and said, okay, what if half of those exemptions were actually taxable within the city limits? That actually made a difference of about $400,000. And that's just a rough estimate. So that's where we could see some potential revenue increases. One of the cons is that the revenue is deposited once a month. We get it approximately the 5th working day of the month. So let's say that the taxes are due April 20th. We would not receive those funds until, the 5th working day in May. So it might be the 7th that we'd receive it. I do not foresee that being an issue. At this time, I think that, I think the increase in the revenue outweighs that. And then we also would lose our license fee because the state would not allow us to charge a sales tax or collect a sales tax license fee. We have some ideas on what we can possibly do with other license fees or with other licenses other than a sales tax license. Maybe we come up with a business license so then we can actually know what businesses are in the city limits. So those are some of the pros and cons that we have. If we were to move forward with this, it is a very tight timeline. We have to have an agreement with the state. We need to notify them 45 days prior to July 1. Otherwise, we cannot switch until January 1. And so that means that we'd need to move forward sooner than later, just to give that notice to the state so we can start working through everything. We'd also need to have some code modifications done. One of the big ones is to allow for the filing periods to be aligned with the state. We would also have to put that the state, that we are not self-collected, that the state is going to be collecting on our behalf. Catherine, do you want to speak as to what other types of code modifications that you see that we may have?
Sure. So I think Jim and Ashley, at least maybe Dolly was on council at the time, will remember the last sales tax definitions process that we went through, and we updated all those definitions. So we need to compare all of our definitions now to the state definitions. And I honestly don't know how close they are. They could be identical. I just don't know. And like Tammy mentioned, we need to compare exemptions and everything so that we don't, one, either trigger a Tabor election by doing that. And I think it's highly unlikely that we would, but we still have to check it all. Or that we don't lose, and she kind of touched on this, some kind of sales tax revenue you'd like to keep. Because once you remove it, you have to go through Tabor in a Tabor election to regain it. So we just want a really good idea of what the implications of the change are, at least from the city attorney's perspective. So you can make your good informed choice. And so, yeah, that time frame is incredibly tight to do that by July 1st.
I mean, what's the reality of being able to pull that off?
You're not.
And Tammy, maybe you know the answer to this question. Can we indicate to them now that that's our plan and meet the 45 days? And then if we, for some reason, don't meet it or have an issue, we can back out of it? I think we can.
Right, I think we can as well. I did speak with the state and ask, okay, so if we decide that we're going state collected and we've done this for a few years with you, and now we decide we want to be self-collected again. Can we get out of it? And they said, yes, all you have to do is essentially you either get out January 1 or July 1. So same time as opting in. So if we opt in and say that it's going to be in effect July 1, then the state starts doing, they would send us the paperwork that we need, and they would do the communications to show that we're now state collected. We would still be responsible for the taxes collected from June 1 to June 30th. That would be paid in July, so that the individuals would still pay to, the businesses would still pay to the city. So, you know, to get all of the code changed and stuff, I think we may have a little bit of leeway with that, a little bit more time.
Tammy, I know they want to see the ordinance at some point in this process. Did they tell you like when the drop off date? I know they can be kind of a stickler about that drop off date.
No, she did not give me an official drop off date on that. They did just say that the time frame is 45 days. And so I think that puts us about May 15th.
So I'm just wondering, just keeping in mind that our businesses are under a lot of duress and stress right now. And if we try to pull this off really quickly, maybe that's just not a fair thing to do on them so suddenly. I just wonder if it would be better to wait till the January. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Well, one thing with speaking with, with looking at the businesses is that some of our businesses are quarterly filers with the state. And so instead of them having to file every single month with us, it would eliminate that and they would just go to the quarterly. And so it may have some relief for them.
What about, like, let's say right now we are not charging late fees for sales tax remittance because of the COVID. We would probably lose that ability to have that flexibility for our small businesses during times of duress.
The state also has implemented that they are not charging the penalties or interest. That the incentive that they have given individuals is that if you go ahead and file on time and pay on time, you can still take the vendor credit. If you do not, and you choose to have the penalties waived, you lose that vendor fee that they could keep. So the state actually has been working with the businesses as well.
Jim?
Well, the 45 deadline is May 15th. I mean, I don't see how realistically, with everything else we got going on, the city could put together a plan and present it to council, and then council mull with it and get a decision made so that we could have that deadline by May 15th. That's 3 weeks away. I mean, that's my first question and comment. If there's not others, I got a couple of comments about, you mentioned that we collected 1.1 more million in taxes than what your comparison showed with the state.
So the state had shown what they collected taxes on. So I took their taxable sales and multiplied it by our tax rate. And if you just compare their raw data to our raw data, which their data includes exemptions that we tax, there was about, it was over $1 million difference that they had collected, or that we collected that they wouldn't have. but knowing that we charge sales tax on food except under the SNAP program, we know that there's more items taxable to us than there are to the state. So then I used 50% of the exemptions and said, okay, what would that have done? Because I cannot get a breakdown of what the exemptions were, because we've been trying to get that and they cannot give me that. They can just tell me that this is the total amount of exemptions. And so comparing that, we said, okay, what would it have done? And then that shows, that showed that it had over about 400,000 more that we would have collected. Which we know this is not realistic, this is not a realistic look, but if you would have went on the total taxable sales or the total retail sales for the state that they had reported in our area, it would have said that there was $19 million collected in tax when we collected the 10 million. But we know that that figure has things that still would not be taxable. So I see that by going state collected, we would see an increase in revenue. If we do not move to self-collected at this time, we do still need to opt in to their other internet portal collection. I forgot what they're calling it, but we do need to opt into that. Otherwise, we have the potential of losing the sales tax from the out of area, from the online vendors.
Jim?
So the 1.1 million and the comparison that you did with the state tax was collected with those additional 8,000 vendors, is that correct?
Yes. And also when we looked at the number of returns that the state had filed with them versus the returns we had filed, over the course of the year, the state had 3,000 more sales tax returns filed for the city of Canyon City than we are showing.
I guess where I've got a problem or a question in the math is that if the city or if the state is taxing more entities than we are, or businesses than we are, but their tax revenue is less. I don't know that you can go back to that same base and say half of those people are going to be taxable. Something doesn't seem.
It's the items that are non-taxable. So for the state, food is not taxable. And they, so if you go buy your groceries at Walmart or City Market or Safeway, you don't pay state sales tax unless it's on junk food, but you pay city sales tax. And I do not have that breakdown of how much the exemption for food was. And that is why I chose about 50% of that.
Do you know how many entities in the state of Colorado charge tax on food?
Not off the top of my head, I do not. I do know that some of the resort areas do charge tax on food.
Ryan, do you know?
I don't.
Because that's an issue with our community, is the fact that we do, in fact, I don't think Pueblo does, but we do in fact tax food. And that doesn't set well with a lot of people. I know that's a lot of money, but I'm
Well,
just telling you.
Separate. This is totally separate than the, are we going to tax on food or not? I mean, that has to go to voters. If we were to cut on food, we'd have to raise our property taxes like all the other communities have higher property taxes. So I don't think this is a discussion on what are we going to tax or not tax. This is just a discussion on, are we going to have this remitted to the state and collected by the state, or are we going to keep collecting it? Dolly?
Yeah, but we don't know what the numbers are.
So if this, okay, so right now, how many people work? Can you guys hear me? My microphone is acting funny. Okay. So how many people work on processing city sales tax right now in the finance department?
We have one full-time employee who does sales tax.
Now, if this were to go to the state, what would that person's job look like after that?
That leads us to the next slide.
Okay, well then, let me back up.
Okay.
Because I had one other question. I guess I don't, sorry.
Okay. And Tarla did remind me that even if we opt into the state for the online or out of area retailers that are would be remitting to the state on our behalf, that does have an implementation cost of $5,000 to make sure that we can get those online retailers still paid to us.
Oh, okay. Say that again, because that might have been my question.
So if we opt into having the state collect the online retailers' sales tax on our behalf, we do have to pay an implementation fee of, it's approximately $5,000. What that is it gives us access to MuniRevs, which is the program that they're going to be using, and then also some reporting and some of those things. But essentially, it's in the MuniRevs. If we wanted, go ahead.
That's a one-time fee?
Yes, that is a one-time fee.
Okay.
But then if we want that information to be in our system to compare the online retailers that we have and just make sure that they are actually remitting the tax that they need to, we would then have to figure out how to get those returns out of MuniRevs and get them into ADG.
Okay.
So there's some issues with doing that as well.
So that did kind of spark my question that I had. Do we currently have anybody who is not paying their city sales tax online? I know we moved to doing that, and there were a few people who decided it wasn't going to work for them.
Correct. We still do have individuals that are submitting their payments through the mail. And so each of those returns that they do, we have to enter into the system.
So what will that look like for those individuals if we moved to this other system?
So so if we go state collected, essentially they can either file a paper return, if that's what they're doing with the state now, or they can file online. So it would essentially just eliminate them sending us a sales tax return.
So it would go directly to them. So if they were to put because I think these people, the point is they want to mail a check. Would that be an option to be able to mail a check to the State Department rather than to the City of Canyon City?
Yes, what they would do is they would make one payment. They would make it to the Colorado Department of Revenue, and then at the end of the month, the state reconciles the funds and sends us our portion that's due.
Okay. Okay.
I did speak with the finance director from the city of Alamosa. She said that they went state collected in July of last year, and that they did see a slight increase in revenue for the first few months, and then towards the end of the year, they saw a drastic increase in sales tax revenue. She also said that the state's practice is that if somebody has short paid their taxes, that they pay the cities and the counties first and then leave the balance owing to the state. Because by the state doing that, the state then can go after the individual business, because it's money owing to the state, not owing to any other government.
So we have a question on Facebook from Bob Weir. He says, would this require a voter approval? Ryan, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, no, it wouldn't require any voter approval. We're not changing the taxes themselves, just how they're collected. And to back up just a little bit to Councilwoman Gonzalez's comments, again, we're trying to streamline some of these processes. So when they're remitting to the state, it's just another step in that process rather than having a separate process and remitting to the city through a different form. So when they remitted to the state, it would, all of those taxes that they're collecting for the state, the county, and the city would all go to the same place. So again, trying to streamline some of these processes and again, be more business friendly.
So, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Dolly, and then we'll go back to Jim.
I have one more quick question. So right now, do you think that online vendors are collecting taxes and just keeping them, not filing them? Is that what we're thinking is happening?
So part of this discussion actually came out of a question that Councilman Hamrick had asked many months ago with that exact question. Are we collecting all of the revenue from online retailers that we should be collecting? And as we've dug into this, and as Tammy has done this analysis, it does appear that there are online vendors who are selling within the city limits who are not remitting taxes to the city. Okay.
Are they collecting taxes? Do you know?
That is what this new state system is supposed to be helping with. So part of the Wayfair law says that there cannot be and Catherine can correct me if I'm wrong in interpreting this, that Wayfair law says that part of the reason why we can collect those online taxes is because there cannot be an undue burden to those online retailers. So what the state is trying to do is consolidate all of that tax collection and all of the different tax rates into one system, so that it makes it easy and more of a seamless process for those online retailers, so they can collect and remit without trying to figure out every jurisdiction's tax laws.
Okay, thank you.
All right, to you, Jim.
So in terms of the differences in the amount of businesses that we show versus the state shows, you're talking about a 300 versus 500, which is a difference of 200, and 1,200 versus 8,000 or something like that, which is 6,800. Is
Yes.
there, are we speculating that those 7,000 businesses that we're not accounting for, if those businesses are selling product outside the city limits, they wouldn't be taxable anyways? Is that not correct?
What those vendors are is they are outside of the city limits selling goods or products to residents of the city. So whether it's shipped in from Amazon, Wayfair, Overstock.com, whoever, and it's more than likely some of the smaller entities that know that they need to pay the state sales tax. They just are not, they're not aware that they need to pay Canyon City sales tax. And we
That would
cannot,
apply,
go ahead.
that would apply to the 6,800.
Yes, that would apply to the 6,800. And we have asked if we could find out more information from the state about, you know, some of those businesses, and we can't. They will not release any information to us. All they'll say is, okay, we have this many active licenses, and that's all we can tell you.
So I guess,
Catherine, that's not open records?
No,
So-
because it has to do with tax records, and those are protected.
Yeah, the state won't share that information.
so the question is, do we want staff to pursue this? If we do, it'll have to go pretty quickly.
I think you need to be honest about how quickly the city's capable of doing this.
I don't think, you can't do it by July.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to have the ordinance fully passed by the second meeting in June.
I mean,
the situation, the structure would have to be in place by then.
Tammy said she had another slide after this one.
No, the staffing slide is the one I have, because we figured that would be a concern, you know, because we do have one FTE that currently does everything with sales tax. So currently they are monitoring and entering sales tax, doing assessments and those types of things. Their job would change to basically they would be monitoring the collections and then also reach out to the state for any accounts that are of concern to us. They would also focus their collection efforts on the delinquent accounts that were delinquent prior to June 30th. Because we still do have individuals that have not filed returns, and we would need to go ahead and try to get to the enforcement on that. One thing that we had talked about is we would get a report of the businesses that had remitted tax, let's say in August, and we could compare that to the people that have filed with us, and we could look into still going and doing audits on those businesses that had not remitted. So there would be a lot for that individual to do. They would also monitor and audit the sales tax collected on the building permits, assuming we switch to it being at the point of sale versus a use tax. And then also they would basically become our payroll person as well, to process the biweekly payroll. We do have the vacant part-time position open, and we would not fill that position. We would have the person that is doing the sales tax trained to do that. And so we would have additional cost savings there as well.
Jim?
So at one point in the conversation, I interpreted that the internet sales issue, we could move forward with that, or is that not an option, that we have to move forward with both? That we can't have the state doing the collecting on the internet sales, but then hold off on them doing the other ones?
We can opt into having them do the internet sales. That is the one that will be about a $5,000 implementation fee.
Right.
We can do that. But if we move to state collected, we will not get any of that $5,000 back, even if we go effective January. If we go effective January 1, we would not get any of that back. And that's why we were going to try to push for the July 1. I can reach out to the state, to Luann, and see what all they require us to have in place before they go state before we would go state collected to see if there is any way that we could get this going through, you know, to be effective July 1.
Catherine, you said you'd like to speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm 15 minutes late for the planning commission meeting, and I'm doing orientation. So I just wanted to say goodbye and that I had to go. So.
Did the
I gotta
clouds
go
move?
too.
Thanks, Catherine.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
I have to go too. I put my piece in the comments so you can read it out loud.
Oh, okay.
I'll
Sounds
see you
like-
guys later.
So thank you, Dolly. So I'll read
Bye-bye.
Dolly's comment. She says, I like this idea, but I'd like to wait and see how this pandemic affects businesses in the next few months. I would like to see us wait and revisit again in October for January 2021 implementation. So I guess one of the questions to staff is, and that's something that Catherine had said too, is realistically, can we actually pull this off in July, or is it more realistic for us to aim for January?
Yeah, I think some of that is going to be dependent upon what needs to be in place before we opt in. You know, if the ordinances have to be passed before we can say yes, then no, I don't think it's realistic. You know, there's you know, some work that needs to be done on the legal side, and you know, that's probably more of a discussion with Catherine and Corey to see if you know, what their capacity is right now. I think at the very least, as Councilman Meissner was probably suggesting, we should look at you know, going to the online collection, at least in the short term, to
I agree.
with a goal to going towards state collected by January if we do this evaluation and timeline's too tight.
Do you feel like we'd get that $5,000 back through 2020 by collecting better on the online sales?
Tammy, what are your thoughts on that?
We might. I would assume, especially at the end of the year, October, November, December, we would. The biggest involvement is going to be what all needs to be changed in our code. Just if we went state collected. If there are not that many items that need changed in the code, and we can get that going in May, on the staff side, as in city staff, there's nothing more we would need to do other than to send out a letter to our businesses in collaboration with the state to say we're going state collected. And on the state side, all they do is, essentially, she said, what they do is they flip a switch that says state collected versus self-collected. They already have the addresses in with our location, with the location code for Canyon City. So the behind the scenes things aren't going to be as in depth as we would think. The biggest part is going to be the code change. If, you know, the biggest one of them is that we need to put in there that we're state collected versus self-collected, and then we just need to make sure that our definitions are in line with what the state definitions are. But my recollection is that we adopted the standard definitions. And so if we did that, I don't know how many more changes we would need.
Yeah, I think those were definitions that were they put forward by CML's legal team. Is that correct, Tammy?
Right.
Yes, that was correct, because it was in an effort to make it easier for online retailers to know that what we call a dog is the same thing that somebody else calls a dog. You know, and I know that's not a good example, but I'm just saying. So we're all on, so they were all on the same page.
So Ryan, there's only a couple of us that are on this call today. Can we send a link to this meeting to the rest of our city council members and have them give some thumbs up if they want to, you know, proceed and what timeline that they would,
Questions, things like that. Yep.
questions they have.
Yeah, you need to be careful with that.
Within legal parameters, of course, but I don't feel comfortable making a decision.
Right, I agree, but I mean, I think that the online sales are going to continue to be a growing percentage versus brick and mortar sales. And I think the pandemic helps reinforce that. And I think it's a no-brainer for us to switch over to getting the rightful taxation of those online sales. And the other one, you know, we can play around with that one.
Yeah, you know, at the very least, with the online sales, you know, Wayfair was supposed to level the field to help this brick and mortars, but you know, taking some additional steps and having you know, the support of the states will help level that playing field even a little bit more to make sure that, you know, they're charging the same taxes that our brick and mortar stores are charging.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously in favor of moving forward. Have a few more questions about the timeline for July for our regular small businesses. Definitely need to move forward for online, but I would also like in the proper way to see what the other council members would like to do as far as timing goes.
Yep.
Part of that messaging too is finding out realistically how much work needs to be done by May 15th.
Tarla just reminded me as well that even if we opt into the online portal for the state filing for the online retailers, that we're still going to have to modify our code to align with the state filing periods, because our code says monthly filing, where those online retailers are subject to what the state does. So no matter what, we're going to have to come back with at least that code change.
Okay, well, I guess get to
Gives you
work.
something to work on.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we'll do the homework and do the legwork, and I will reach out to council members and, you know, make sure that they take a look at this video and let us know if they have any questions.
Okay. In the meantime, I just want to remind viewers that we do have our Facebook Live tomorrow with the mayor, Ryan Stevens, administrator, and Chief Harvey. And I think there'll be a lot of clarifications that'll be given out as far as how things are going to be opening up for Canyon City and Fremont County starting April 27th and May 4th. And also want to reinforce it doesn't mean that we are open to the normal social life we wanted. It means we're still wearing face masks, still in groups less than 10, and that it's incredibly critical to adhere by that so that we can keep the transfer of the virus low. The FCDPHE says they're starting to report not just confirmed cases, but probable cases. And so that's pushed us up to 19 cases now in Fremont County. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. And if there aren't any more questions or discussion, I will close this meeting. We're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for all your work.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank you.